Our devotional moment for today is coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 5. The key verses that we're going to look at today will be verses 4 and 5, verse 7, as well as verse 13. Key terms that we want to highlight on today will be paradidomi and sozo. Our main idea for today is hand him over. Hand him over. I want us to just briefly reflect on if we've ever knew someone or held someone close whose lifestyle we knew was not in order. They were struggling and they really had no sense of remorse. Honestly, they were just kind of out there doing their thing. But we've been trying to cling to them. We've been trying to keep them around, keep them in the church, keep them in the community. I've been trying to hold them close because I think eventually, that'll help them come out of whatever they're dealing with. And as I thought about this, it really came to me in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 is I wonder if our approach sometimes, this clinging to holding them close, regardless of their desire to be let go, if that's really redemptive, if that's really going to work out, for their good, ultimately in the end. And so when I look here at 1 Corinthians chapter 5, I think it's a challenging text. It's a very challenging text. But I believe it is a redemptive text. And so I just want to read just a couple verses here, a few verses, and share a couple thoughts. But starting at verse number 1, and I'm going to read this from the New American Standard Bible version because I believe it brings more clarity to the text. The New American Standard Bible. And it reads, it is actually reported, this is verse number 1, it is actually reported that there is immorality among you, and immorality of such a kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles, amongst pagans, amongst people who do not know Christ. That someone has his father's wife. Okay, there's a man who's in an incestuous relationship. He has basically his mother-in-law. He has his father's wife. He says, verse number 2, you have become arrogant and have not mourned instead. This is really to the community of the Corinthians. You have been arrogant. You have not mourned instead, so that the one who had done this deed, who's in this incestuous relationship, would be removed from your midst. And I want us to just think very briefly about that. Paul is challenging, again, the Corinthians. So you have this incestuous person in your midst. You as a community, you're arrogant about it. You're not remorseful. You're not sad. And perhaps if you hadn't been sad, if you hadn't been remorseful, that individual would have been removed from your midst. Perhaps would have left if you had different emotions towards this behavior, this lifestyle that they were exhibiting. But you've been arrogant about it. And so now he says in verse number 3, for I, on my part, though absent in body, but present in spirit, have already judged him who has so committed this, as though I were present. It says in verse number 4, in the name of our Lord Jesus, when you are assembled, and I with you in spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus, I have decided to deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of his flesh. I want to stop right there very briefly. Okay, so Paul first challenges the community. Your attitude towards this behavior has not been helpful. In so many words, this individual has been comfortable living any type of way amongst you because you're arrogant, you're prideful, hostility, all of that we've already discussed. He says, so I've taken it upon myself. I decided when you come together as a assembled congregation, dismiss this person from your midst. He says, I have decided to deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of his flesh. And if I stop right there, it's kind of like, wow, whoa, wait a minute. Paul, what are we doing here? You're actually going to get rid of this person. But you have to continue to read within the text. Okay, and you have to see, remember, Paul came out of chapter 4 saying that he has become a father to them, a father in the gospel to this community. Okay, and now he's saying, I have decided to hand someone over to Satan. I'm going to hand him over. I'm delivering him to Satan. This word deliver comes from the Greek word paradidomi. Paradidomi, and it literally means to hand over. It's to give over to another's custody. In this case, it is Satan. And Paul, before I get into a little bit of the grammar that I believe helps us, he does something similar in 1 Timothy, where he says, in this case, it is two individuals, Hymenaeus and Alexander. He said, as he talked about those rejecting the faith and making shipwreck of their faith, he says in verse number 20 of 1 Timothy chapter 1, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan. Now, what we have to understand is that in both of these texts, they are surrounded with subjunctive verbs, okay? And, just at a high level, a subjunctive mood, it speaks to probability, okay? It really stresses potential. And more specifically, when it's linked with this Greek word henna, henna in combination with a subjunctive produces, in many cases, in almost every case, purpose, right? That I'm doing this for a specific purpose. Okay, so I'm handing these individuals over to Satan for a specific purpose. Okay, in the case of 1 Timothy, he's saying, I have handed over Hymenaeus and Alexander. Why, Paul? He says, so that they may learn not to blaspheme, right? So the purpose of me handing them over is for their education on not blaspheming. Okay, so there's a purpose behind me doing this. Okay, now if we go back to this text that we're dealing with on today, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, I am handing, or I'm delivering this man to Satan. You are to deliver him. He's telling the Corinthians as a congregation, the next time you're assembled together, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Now, there's a couple of prepositional phrases. I don't have time to get into all of that detail, but really for the destruction of the flesh, right, it's really modifying why we're going to hand him over, or what you're handing him over for the destruction of the flesh. And you may think that, wow, that's, I don't believe this means to kill the man, right? Some may think this is to kill him, right? I don't believe this is the case, as we'll read further. But he's saying to destroy the works of his flesh is what I believe he's really getting at, right? We're going to mortify the works of his flesh, right? Paul talks about dying daily to the flesh, right? It's this behavior, this incestuous behavior, okay? We deliver him over to Satan because we have to deal with this wicked behavior, right? It's to destroy the flesh, okay? And you never know, how God can work in someone's life, okay? Because he goes on to say, and he uses the same henna subjunctive combination. He says, deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that, henna, right, for the purpose that his spirit may be saved. This Greek word saved is sozo, and it literally means in this context to save from eternal death, okay, to attain salvation, right? So deliver him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. And he gets back into this eschatology, and it's really his state at the end. So it's really, okay, think about it like this. Paul is saying in so many words, I want to temporarily, okay, let's just say this is his prayer. I want to temporarily separate him from us, separate him from the community, right? You can say disfellowship, right? But it is not to destroy him to eternal damnation. It's not to just do away with this person and be gone with them. It says, no, the prayer is that during this season of separation or this season of isolation, it becomes redemptive, right? It becomes redemptive for him. That ultimately, whatever happens with handing over him to Satan, and we understand if you talk to Job, what that can look like. That can be pain, that can be suffering, that can be some hard times, right? But our prayer is that him coming out of that, he is saved in the day of the Lord, right? So we're going to, right, understand this. He's casting judgment, but we have to realize present judgment does not mean final judgment, okay? You can judge a person presently based on their present state. That does not mean final judgment, right? Paul has already made it clear. The final judgment is up to the Lord, right? The Lord will judge all at that day. But presently, I'm judging him based on his lifestyle, and he is to be put out right now. But our prayer is that he will be saved. He goes on and uses a couple of imperatives. He says, cleanse out, right, the old leaven, from among you. And he says, he kind of ends, purge the evil person from among you. Purge them out. But we have to understand this, and I pray this is what we understand really as I'm coming to a close. I want to just read this very, very quickly. This was an excerpt from Pillar New Testament from Champa and Rosner, and I think this is helpful. He says, Paul does not answer the question of whether the man is presently saved. His point is that so-called brothers who engage in blatant sexual misconduct will finally be saved on the day of the Lord only if the sinful nature is destroyed. Right? Proverbs 23, verse 13 to 14, it says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol or from hell. In other words, sometimes we think holding on to this person, I got to keep you around and eventually you're going to come out of this. That may not actually be redemptive. What if the redemption comes and actually, handing this person over to the lifestyle that they want to live, and with that season that they're in, the trouble, the suffering that may come along with that, it awakens them, revives them, reconciles them, and brings them back to the Lord so that they're ultimately saved. It's the story of the prodigal son. And I got to get out of here. I'm way over time. It's the story of the prodigal son. But he's basically saying, listen, let me have my stuff and I'm out of here. Okay, let me just go do my thing for a while. Let me go do my thing. Okay. And his father's like, here it is. And he goes and he lives this foul life, this blatant, wicked life. But then the Bible said he comes to himself and he says, man, what am I doing out here? I got to get back home. I got to get back home. And what's so powerful, and this is where I believe Paul is being fatherly, right? In his approach, he's not trying to be deadly. I believe he's being redemptive in his approach, because when that prodigal is coming back, when his father sees him, he runs out and he greets him, he hugs him, he kisses him. We understand he puts a ring on his finger, he clothes him, he celebrates, because though he left, he don't care about how he left. The redemption is more important, that he's come back home. And so all I'm saying, brothers and sisters, is that, we have to understand God works in ways that are beyond us at times. Sometimes us trying to cling to someone who perhaps does not really want to know God in a specific season of their life may not be truly redeeming for them. But Paul here says, I want you to hand him over to Satan. Our prayer is that his flesh can be mortified in these deeds, this incestuous behavior can be destroyed. And ultimately, that he can be saved, that his spirit may be saved at that last day. Pray this was helpful. Join us again tomorrow for another devotion.